Welcome to the debate. Have you ever wondered why someone can score perfectly on, like, an advanced grammar exam?
Right, flawlessly conjugating every irregular verb there is.
Exactly. But then they sound completely unnatural when trying to, I don't know, navigate a casual dinner party in Paris or console a grieving friend in Tokyo.
It is a very real and very frustrating phenomenon.
It really is. So today we are looking at this exact phenomenon by examining a fascinating text, The Architecture of Thought and Linguistic Mastery. And specifically, we are debating the true nature of linguistic mastery at the C1 level.
Right. When a learner reaches this highly advanced stage, what is the actual mechanism that gets them to that coveted native-like intuition?
And I would argue that true proficiency requires, well, meticulous scrutiny of complex linguistic structures. You need to understand their underlying logic in order to fundamentally restructure your own understanding of existence.
And I maintain that ultimate mastery is found in understanding the contextual utility, right? The cultural weight of language, which frankly often culminates in powerful, concise expression rather than, elaborate, rigid complexity.
Okay, let's start by laying the foundation from the text. The author establishes early on that language is not just a utility belt for communication.
Mm-hmm.
It is the very framework upon which we build our understanding of existence. If we accept that premise, reaching a C1 level isn't just about learning new words for old ideas.
Right. It's not a vocabulary drill.
It's an architectural overhaul of your brain. Learners frequently fail to bridge the gap from intermediate to advanced because they fall into what the text calls the trap of oversimplification. I mean, they fear complex structures.
Yeah, they stick to what's safe.
Exactly. But achieving native-like intuition demands a disciplined approach to reading and listening, where you don't just skim for surface meaning. You must meticulously scrutinize the underlying logic of how linguistic elements interact. It's about grasping the cohesive whole by mastering its intricate structural parts.
Well, I certainly don't disagree that language forms a cognitive framework. But, the text explicitly warns us against viewing words merely as structural units, like bricks in a wall.
Sure, but
There is a profound difference between knowing a word's syntactic category and understanding its human utility. The text defines a word as a vehicle for a specific cultural and emotional state.
a vehicle, yes.
Right. So, if you view mastery purely as the accumulation of structural complexity, you miss a vital assertion from the source material. The most powerful communication often resides in concise expressions that carry immense weight. Achieving the pinnacle of language is rooted in contextual utility, tone, and register, not just the mechanical assembly of subordinate clauses.
Okay, I hear that, but if we accept that language dictates our perception of reality, we have to look at the mechanics of how that actually happens. The text posits that our vocabulary acts as a filter through which reality is perceived.
Mm-hmm.
So, let's look at this mechanically. Learning a language at this level is like reverse engineering a mechanical clock. You cannot alter the filter of your reality without first taking apart the machinery.
Taking it apart, sure.
Yeah, you have to meticulously observe the complex interplay of every single gear, the syntax, the morphological rules, the grammar, before that clock can accurately keep time. To me, keeping time is achieving fluency.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because you can't just admire the clock face, You have to understand the logic of the gears.
Okay, I hear what you're saying with the gears. But, a perfectly functioning mechanical clock is completely useless if you don't know what time zone you're in.
Oh, well, that's a clever distinction, but explain how that actually applies to the linguistics.
I come at it from a different way. Because the time zone is the cultural context, you're separating the mechanics from the humanity, which is frankly a trap C1 learners fall into constantly.
I wouldn't call it a trap to understand grammar.
But the logic of a language at the advanced level isn't purely structural syntax. It is fundamentally emotional and cultural. Let's look at the text's specific example regarding high-level literature. The author notes that when you engage with this literature, you start to see how a writer's deliberate choice of verbs shapes the reader's perception of time and space.
Right.
And that shaping isn't just about whether a verb is in the, I don't know, pluperfect subjunctive.
Wait, but it often is exactly about that.
Is it?
Yes, the subjunctive mood in Romance languages, for example, forces the speaker to structurally categorize a statement not as a hard fact, but as a desire, a doubt, or an emotional reaction.
Well, sure.
By forcing the brain to select a completely different verb conjugation based on an emotional evaluation, the speaker is structurally rewriting their cognitive process. The choice of verb and its tense is an inherently structural choice that alters the cognitive framework of the thought itself.
Yeah, but the trigger for that structural choice is empathy and context, not a math equation. To recognize that pattern, to know when to use that subjunctive to imply a subtle emotional distance rather than just blindly following a textbook rule, that requires an acute awareness of tone and register.
But the rule comes first.
The text explicitly states this, though. Tone and register dictate how the clock is perceived by the listener. If you are entirely focused on reverse engineering the grammatical gears, you miss the invisible patterns of cultural weight that actually make a native speaker sound native.
I still think.
Let's look at a real-world scenario. Think of a business meeting. An intermediate speaker might use a rigid, literal translation to politely disagree, but a C1 speaker understands a cultural time zone. They might use a specific, culturally weighted idiom that structurally is very simple, but carries the exact right amount of deference and assertiveness. The filter of reality isn't just changed by new syntax, it's changed by adopting the cultural lens that the vocabulary carries.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. I completely understand the value of that cultural lens, but you cannot successfully deploy the cultural utility of a language if you do not fundamentally understand the underlying structural logic that holds it together.
Even for idioms?
Yes, you bring up the business meeting. Sure, a concise idiom can be powerful. But the text argues that reluctance to embrace complexity is the primary barrier to reaching that native-like intuition. It describes the process of examining how elements interact as a slow, often difficult process.
It is difficult, yeah.
And I argue that you cannot arrive at those perfectly weighted, concise expressions without first traversing that difficult terrain of complexity. I mean, let's be real. Conciseness born of ignorance is just basic conversation. Conciseness born of mastery is the distillation of complexity.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered whether complexity is merely a stepping stone to conciseness, or if it is the destination itself? Because I see a lot of language learners treat it as the destination.
Oh, it is the necessary crucible. The learner must rigorously deconstruct elaborate sentences, interwoven concepts, nuanced syntax. The text literally states that one must be meticulous in observing how concepts are interwoven.
Okay, but to what end?
Think about what happens when an intermediate learner tries to express a highly nuanced thought. They lack the structural boundaries, the relative clauses, the specific conjunctions to define exactly where one thought ends and another begins.
Right, so they just string words together.
Exactly. They string together a series of simple, disconnected sentences. It sounds juvenile. To truly nuance your thoughts with precision, you need mechanics. If a learner avoids this rigorous deconstruction because they want to quickly jump to concise expressions, they will simply remain at an intermediate level, relying on literal interpretations of words.
But look at how the text actually provides a counterweight to this exact pursuit of endless elaboration. It states verbatim, "This is not to say that every sentence must be elaborate. On the contrary, the most powerful communication often resides in concise expressions."
Well, I didn't say everything must be elaborate.
The danger of your framework, though, is that it encourages learners to view complexity as the ultimate measure of their intelligence in the new language. We see this in C1 candidates all the time. They hit this plateau where they construct these labyrinthine, highly elaborate sentences that are grammatically flawless but completely unnatural.
Oh, sure.
They have mastered the gears, but they lack conceptual clarity. To go back to the business meeting, if someone delivers a pitch using 4 subordinate clauses and archaic conditional phrasing just to prove they can, they lose the room. True sophistication is knowing when to drop the complexity.
Okay, I actually agree with you on what happens at that plateau. And honestly, I remember hitting that exact wall myself. I used to construct these absolute monsters of sentences, piling clauses on top of clauses, thinking I was sounding like a philosopher when I actually just sounded like a malfunctioning textbook.
Exactly. We've all been there. It's a very specific type of linguistic awkwardness.
It is, but here is where we diverge on how to solve that awkwardness. When a learner constructs a labyrinthine sentence that sounds unnatural, they haven't actually mastered the complexity, they have merely mimicked it.
Mimicked it?
Yes, they haven't achieved the native-like intuition because they haven't yet internalized the logic to the point where they can simplify it appropriately. The text calls language learning an endurance test and a marathon. When learners hit these plateaus where they are overcomplicating things, they shouldn't abandon the structural rigor.
I'm not saying abandon it.
Instead, as the text directs, they must treat every setback as an opportunity for refinement. You refine the structural framework until you can seamlessly think in the target language. The goal isn't to stop using complex structures, it's to internalize them so deeply that their usage becomes as effortless as thought.
Well, we are definitely in agreement that this is a marathon, and that progress is rarely linear. The periods of immense clarity followed by profound frustration are a universal experience in this text.
Oh, absolutely.
But how we define the ultimate finish line of this marathon, the true pinnacle, is where our perspectives split. You seem to view the pinnacle as this internalized, flawless structural engine where thought and grammar are perfectly synchronized in the background.
Mostly yes.
But look closely at how the text defines the ultimate goal. I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. It doesn't say the goal is structural perfection. It says the goal is to become an active participant, capable of contributing your own ideas and nuances to the linguistic landscape.
Okay, and how does one contribute those nuances without an impeccable command of the structure? The text explicitly states, ultimately, the goal is to develop an impeccable command of the language, where expression becomes as effortless as thought itself. Impeccable command implies structural mastery.
Impeccable command implies utility, adaptability, and emotional resonance. The text follows that exact sentence by stating, this level of mastery grants you a unique perspective, allowing you to navigate diverse environments with confidence and sophistication.
Right, diverse environments.
And navigating diverse environments is fundamentally about context. It's about shifting your register. The way you speak to a university professor during a debate is entirely different from the way you speak to a shopkeeper when you're buying vegetables, which is different again from how you speak to a close friend in a moment of crisis.
But the grammar is the same.
The mechanical gears of the language don't change in those scenarios, but the cultural vehicle does. If your mastery is purely structural, you are inflexible. The pinnacle of the learning journey, the moment you stop translating in your head, is the moment you fully integrate into the cultural matrix. You become a participant, not just an observer of the mechanics.
Let's dig into that concept of translating in your head, because I actually think it proves my point about structure.
Go on.
Why exactly do intermediate learners translate in their heads? What is physically happening?
They do it because their native language is still functioning as the dominant architecture, of their existence.
Right.
They formulate a complex thought entirely within the structural rules of their mother tongue, and then they try to map that thought word by word onto the target language. It's like trying to run Mac software on a PC without an emulator. It just crashes.
Sure.
The text points out that true proficiency is distinguished by the capacity to nuance one's thoughts with precision. You literally cannot stop translating until you have dismantled your old cognitive architecture and rebuilt a new one in the target language.
I agree with the diagnosis of why translation happens, but I disagree with the cure. But how do you build new architecture? You build it with structural integrity. You have to move beyond the literal interpretation of words by rigorously examining how linguistic elements interact to create a cohesive whole. Let's look at a concrete example.
Okay.
In English, we often rely heavily on tone of voice to convey sarcasm or doubt. In another language, conveying that same doubt might require a completely different syntactical structure, perhaps changing the word order entirely or employing a specific particle at the very end of the sentence.
Right, like in Japanese.
Exactly. Until the learner fundamentally understands and internalizes that structural rule, they will continue to translate their English tone onto the foreign words, and they will sound foreign. The confidence to navigate diverse environments, which you value so highly, is merely a byproduct of having an unshakable structural foundation.
Well, it is a necessary foundation, yes. But the text elevates the cultural participation over the structural mechanics. Consider the phrasing the author uses. You are no longer just an observer of the language. You are an active participant.
Right.
Who is the observer in this scenario? The observer is the person meticulously reverse engineering the clock. The observer is the person scrutinizing the underlying logic of the text. That disciplined reading, that structural deconstruction, that is all observational work.
It's active study.
It is vital, I concede that completely, but it is not the pinnacle. The pinnacle is stepping away from the workbench, taking the clock, and using it to synchronize your life with the rest of the culture. It is engaging with the emotional states of others.
But the division between observation and participation isn't a hard boundary. The text says, keep pushing, keep reading, and keep challenging yourself to find new ways to articulate the complexities of your mind. The participation is the act of articulating those complexities.
Yes, but
And the complexities of the human mind can only be given shape if the linguistic framework is sophisticated enough to hold them. This brings us back to why the trap of oversimplification is so dangerous. If you prioritize concise, culturally appropriate expressions too early in your learning journey, you end up with the very shallow form of active participation.
shallow? I don't know about that.
You are participating, sure, but you are only participating in the simplest, most surface-level conversations. To truly nuance your thoughts with precision, to argue about philosophy, to express complex grief, to debate politics, you have to endure the frustrating periods of structural stagnation and push through them.
We have to be very careful about equating concise with shallow. The text explicitly states that concise expressions can carry immense weight. Think of that concept in practice. A true master of a language doesn't need 3 subordinate clauses to convey devastation. They don't need a labyrinthine sentence to convey joy.
No, they don't need to.
They need one perfectly selected verb, or a short, culturally steeped idiom that shapes the listener's perception entirely. Think of a word like saudade in Portuguese, which encapsulates this profound, melancholic longing. Or even a simple English phrase like, fair enough.
Fair enough.
Structurally, fair enough is nothing. It's 2 words. But culturally, it carries a massive weight of concession, of setting boundaries, of acknowledging a stalemate without malice. That is not oversimplification. That is the ultimate sophistication. It is distilling the staggering complexity of the mind into a single potent cultural vehicle. And that ability relies far more on emotional intelligence and cultural immersion than it does on grammatical diagramming.
Okay, but that perfectly selected verb, or that culturally steeped idiom, it does not exist in a vacuum. It derives its immense weight from its syntactic placement, its relation to the subject, its tense, its aspect. Even a 2-word phrase like, fair enough, relies on an underlying grammatical logic of conversational turn-taking.
Well, sure, there's logic there.
The author's deliberate choice is still a structural choice playing out within the underlying logic of the language. If language is indeed the framework upon which we build our understanding of existence, then mastering that language means mastering the structural rules that govern that existence. You cannot bend the rules to create beautiful, concise art until you have mastered the rules.
And I would say mastering that existence means understanding the human beings who actually inhabit it. The linguistic landscape is populated by people, not just rules of grammar. When the text speaks of gaining a unique perspective, it is referring to the empathy and cultural agility you gain when you can inhabit the emotional states embedded in the vocabulary. The ultimate fluency isn't just knowing how to build the sentence, it's knowing why the sentence matters to the person listening to it.
Well, as we draw this discussion to a close, it is clear we are approaching the text's core truths from distinct yet highly complementary angles. My position remains that true mastery at the C1 level demands a rigorous, structural assimilation of the language. It is this disciplined scrutiny of complex underlying logic that allows a learner to tear down their old cognitive architecture, expand the boundaries of their own consciousness, and ultimately process reality directly in the target language.
And I maintain that ultimate fluency is fundamentally a mastery of cultural utility. While structural knowledge is the baseline, the workbench, as we discussed, true, profound depth is achieved through contextual awareness, mastering the shifting registers of daily life, and the ability to wield concise expression to deliver immense emotional and cultural weight.
Despite our different lenses, we certainly find complete convergence in the text's realistic portrayal of the journey itself. We both acknowledge that language learning is not a linear sprint.
No, not at all.
It is an arduous marathon demanding immense resilience. The thrilling moments of clarity, followed immediately by the frustrating plateaus where you feel like you've forgotten everything, these are universally shared experiences in this pursuit.
Absolutely. We also agree on the text's ultimate vision of what fluency actually feels like at its peak. That moment when expression becomes as effortless as thought itself, and the exhausting mechanical process of internal translation finally ceases. That is a shared destination, even if we are charting different primary navigational paths to get there.
It suggests that holding both perspectives simultaneously, the meticulous rigor of the structural mechanic and the deep empathy of the cultural participant, illuminates just how daunting yet immensely rewarding the journey to C1 fluency truly is. To return to our earlier analogy, it isn't enough to just study the gears of the clock, and it isn't enough to just know the time zone. You need both to truly know the time.
Very well said.
For anyone listening who is currently trapped on one of those frustrating linguistic plateaus, feeling like they will never quite sound native, it may be worth reevaluating your own approach. Are you neglecting the mechanics of the gears, or have you forgotten the time zone you're standing in? We encourage you to explore the source material further to examine your own architecture of thought.
It is a cognitive framework always under construction.
Indeed. Thank you for joining us as we explore the intricate mechanics and the profound humanity behind the words we choose. Until next time, we leave you to ponder your own linguistic landscape.